Picture this. It's August 24, 2001. You're high above the Atlantic, just a tiny speck of light in a vast, dark ocean. This is Air Transat Flight 236, carrying 306 people from Toronto all the way to Portugal. Inside, the cabin is dark and quiet. Most people are asleep. It is a totally normal, boring overnight flight. But up in the cockpit, a complete nightmare is about to unfold. And then it happens. That constant, reassuring hum of the jet engines, it sputters. And then it just dies. A sudden, deafening silence fills the plane, and the only sound is the wind screaming past the windows. For every single person on board, the unthinkable has just become their reality. They are now powerless, thousands of feet in the air, with absolutely nowhere to land.
I mean, how does that even happen? Seriously. These planes are marvels of engineering, packed with backup systems and safety features. So to get to the bottom of this, we have to go back in time. Not to the start of the flight, but to a maintenance hangar 9 days earlier, where one tiny, almost invisible mistake set this whole disaster in motion.
Okay, so back it up to August 15th. The plane is in for a routine inspection, and the maintenance team finds something troubling. They see these tiny little metal chips in the right engine's oil system. That's a huge red flag. It means something inside that engine is literally grinding itself to pieces. The engine had to be replaced, no question about it.
And this is where that classic chain of events begins, where a bunch of small, fixable problems start to stack up. So first, they need a new engine. But the only one they can get their hands on is a slightly older model from Rolls-Royce. Okay, not ideal, but doable. But then a mechanic hits a snag. A hydraulic punk just won't fit right. The clock is ticking. The airline needs this plane back in the air. He tries to pull up the online manual, but the system's down. So under all this pressure, he takes a shortcut. He grabs parts that seem to fit, not realizing he's just made a catastrophic mistake.
So here's the nuts and bolts of that mistake. On the left, that's how it's supposed to look. You've got a fuel line and a hydraulic line, and they're designed to have plenty of space between them. But on the right, that's what actually happened. The mechanic put a new fuel tube next to an old hydraulic tube. They were never, ever designed to be installed together. And because they were mismatched, those two metal tubes filled with highly pressurized fluid were now sitting just millimeters apart, way too close. The craziest part? After the fix, everything looked fine. No leaks, no alarms, nothing. The plane got the green light and flew several more times. But on every single one of those flights, the normal engine vibrations were causing those two tubes to rub together. Slowly, silently, the wall of the fuel line was being worn away, thinner and thinner. It was a ticking time bomb, just waiting to go off miles above the ocean. All right, let's jump back to the night of the flight. For the first few hours, everything is perfectly normal. The plane leaves Toronto with tons of fuel, way more than they need. But then, hours into the journey, deep over the Atlantic, the pilots get their first sign that something is terribly, terribly wrong.
So it starts small, some weird oil readings. The crew figures, probably just a computer glitch. But then at 5:33 a.m., a fuel imbalance alarm goes off. The right tank is draining way faster than the left. Now this is the critical moment. Thinking it's just an imbalance, not a leak, the pilots go from memory instead of pulling out the checklist. They open what's called the crossfeed valve. The idea is to feed the right engine from the full left tank to even things out. But they didn't have an imbalance. They had a massive leak. And by opening that valve, they just started pumping all their good fuel from the left tank directly into that leak. They were literally dumping their fuel into the Atlantic Ocean.
And here's the part that just makes you shake your head. This exact type of failure had happened before. 4 years earlier, an Air France jet had a very similar leak. Investigators at the time strongly recommended that Airbus install an automated system that would specifically warn pilots of a fuel leak. The recommendation was made, the procedures were even updated, but that piece of technology, the one thing that would have told the crew what was really happening, it was never actually installed on the planes. By now, the pilots know they are in deep, deep trouble. They changed course, heading for a military airbase in the Azores Islands, but it is hundreds of miles away. At 6:13 in the morning, the right engine finally starves of fuel and flames out. Now they're flying on just one engine. And then, only 13 minutes later, the left engine sputters and dies too. And just like that, silence. A 200-ton airplane full of people becomes a glider. The main generators shut down, the cockpit screens go dark, the cabin is plunged into total blackness. All you can hear is the wind.
And that runway they were heading for, it's still 144 kilometers away. They have no power, limited flight controls, and exactly one chance to get there. If they come up short, the only other option is the cold, dark Atlantic. They do have one tiny sliver of hope. It's a device called the ram air turbine, or the RAT. It's basically a small propeller that drops out of the belly of the plane. The wind rushing past makes it spin, and that generates just enough emergency electricity to power the most critical flight instruments and hydraulic systems. It is literally the plane's last line of defense. Back in the cabin, it is pure terror. The sudden silence was so complete that people said their ears were ringing. They could hear the crew shouting in the aisles. One flight attendant was so terrified, she turned to a passenger and just pleaded, "Please help me, please help me." People were writing goodbye notes to their families. They were praying. The crew is preparing everyone for the absolute worst-case scenario, a water landing, what pilots call ditching. But trying to land a heavy jetliner on the ocean at night, it's almost a suicide mission. The pilots can't see the surface. They can't judge the waves. The impact alone usually rips the plane to pieces. And even if you survive that, the water is so cold, you die of hypothermia in minutes. But up in the cockpit, Captain Robert Pichet has an ace up his sleeve. Before he was an airline pilot, he was an experienced glider pilot. He and his first officer, Dirk de Jager, are now flying entirely on instinct and skill. They have to nail their speed and altitude perfectly. If they go too slow, they'll stall and fall out of the sky. Too fast, they'll completely overshoot the runway. They get one shot at this. That's it. For 19 unbelievable minutes, they glide this enormous machine through the darkness. It is still, to this day, the longest, powerless glide of a commercial airliner in history. As they get closer to the Azores, they finally see them, the lights of the runway. They might actually make it. At 6:45 a.m., the plane slams onto the runway. They hit it hard and fast. With no engines, there's no reverse thrust, so they're relying completely on the emergency brakes. Tires explode from the pressure, the landing gear literally catches fire, but the plane screeches to a stop. And in under 2 minutes, every single one of the 306 people on board is evacuated. There were some injuries, sure, but miraculously, no one died. So when you look back at the whole thing, it's so clear this wasn't about one single mistake. It was a chain of failures. Any one of these links could have prevented the disaster. The mechanic taking a shortcut, the crew not using their checklist, the missing safety system that had been recommended years before. They all lined up perfectly to create this one terrifying night. In the days that followed, Captain Pichet was hailed as a global hero. And then, the story took a bizarre twist. A secret from his past exploded into the headlines. It turned out that 20 years earlier, he'd served prison time in the US for drug smuggling. The media went into a frenzy, asking how on earth an ex-convict was allowed to fly a passenger jet. But you know who didn't care about his past? The 305 other people on that plane. For them, it was simple. He was the pilot who did the impossible. He turned a falling airplane into a glider and brought every last one of them home safely. He was their hero. End of story. And this whole insane story really leaves you with a big question, especially today. Flight 236 is this incredible reminder that when all the technology fails, when every alarm is silent and every computer screen is dark, survival can come down to the skill, the calm, and the pure gut instinct of the person at the controls. It just makes you wonder, when everything breaks, what do you really trust? The machine or the human?